Sure. Well, very good. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Terry Banos with Michigan's Children, and we are certainly in the thick of it now. It's budget season in Lansing, and things have been heating up lately as both the House and Senate are moving department budgets through their appropriations subcommittees in recent days. For us and all of you here, it's time for us to explore where some of the decision points are landing for the new fiscal year, which will start October 1, so that we can make our voices heard. It seems like a long time ago now, but it was just 3 months ago when the governor presented her budget recommendations and priorities to the legislature, and now it's their time to reciprocate. Matt Gillard, our resident pundit, calls this period the beginning of the middle of the budget process. In terms of a timeline, the governor is calling for settling budget differences by the end of June, and lawmakers, especially House makers running for re-election, would like to have it wrapped up even before then, mid-June approximately. So here today to talk about some of these emerging hot topics are President and CEO Matt Gillard, Michigan's Children Early Childhood Policy and Program Associate Maddie Gillard, one of the hardest working people I know, and two special guests focus on education equity and childcare respectively. Jeff Cobb is here today. Many of you know him. He's the head of government relations with Education Trust Midwest. And also joining us is Tyler Hunty, a childcare provider, business owner who's been outspoken on the needs of the childcare industry. He's also a founding member of the relatively new Michigan Childcare Provider Collective. I'm going to hand this off to Matt next, but first, next slide. I do have a few announcements to share. If you're just joining us, please ID yourself in the chat. Let us know what issues you're following, concerned about, who you work for. We are recording this program and we will be posting it to YouTube later today and also on our website where you can listen to it or share it at any time. And of course, this is also occurring on Facebook Live as we speak. Before the end of the day, we'll post links and resources to our website that have emerged from this conversation. So take a look at www.michiganschildren.org. Lunch and Learn, which is under the resources tab. Hello and welcome. I'm seeing more names popping up. Really good turnout today. Thank you everybody for being here. Finally, Matt will lead a Q&A with the panelists, but we want to know your questions too. So please, during the course of this session, drop your questions in the chat as you're hearing the conversation, and Stephen and I will field them to Matt at the appropriate time. And as a reminder, this is a webinar because of the volume of participants, so you're all muted. The chat is the best place to communicate right now. So next slide. Here are our guests and panelists once again. Next slide. And Matt, why don't you take it away? Thank you.
Well, thanks, Terry, and thanks, Maddie and Tyler and Jeff for being on, but mostly thanks to everybody for tuning in. As Terry said, we got a great crowd today, obviously a hot topic people are interested in, and one we think is worthwhile, obviously, to discuss as well, and hopefully give people some information and maybe some strategies and ideas on how we can work together to continue to advocate for things that we think are important. So we are literally right in the middle of the budget process here, budget season, we call it here in Lansing. This started obviously with the governor presenting her budget proposal to the legislature back in early February. The legislature working off of that, and now, at this point have passed almost all of their individual departmental budgets or individual budget bills through their respective subcommittees and appropriations. And then literally as we speak, I think the full appropriations committee is meeting right now to consider some of those subcommittee recommendations, and that will continue through the rest of this week, probably through next week, and then we'll start to see action on both the House and the Senate floor on these versions. Though each the House and the Senate are likely to pass a full budget or a full array of budget bills here in the next couple of weeks. And then we'll have another revenue estimating conference here in mid to late May. I think the 20th, somewhere around the 20th of May, 24th maybe of May, or the 17th. I can't remember. But anyway, we'll have another revenue estimating conference where the economists and accountants will get in a room and make final determinations on how much money they think the state will have to spend for our next fiscal year. And then those ultimate numbers will be the numbers that are used by the conference committees as they reconcile the differences between the House and the Senate versions, ultimately leading to a final budget being passed by both the House and the Senate and presented to Governor Whitmer for her signature, or her veto pen, or her signature with line items vetoed, and that process sometime mid to late June is what the anticipation is. That's what the governor's called for. There's no reason to expect it won't happen. The Democrats are in control in the majority in both the House and the Senate. We had special elections recently in the House to fill the 2 House seats that were vacant. They were both won by Democrats as expected. So we had narrow Democratic majorities in both chamber, and we're all pointing towards a June, like I said, mid to late June, probably finalization of this budget. So what we want to do today is talk about, there's a lot obviously in this budget. It's 84+ billion in total that the legislature is going to allocate for funding for spending next year. It's a mix of federal and state funds to reach that number, but ultimately decisions by the legislature on all of it. There's a ton in this, a ton that impacts kids and families, a ton of different issues that we at Michigan's Children are focused on. And I know a lot of you tuning in today are focused on. We're going to zero in on a couple of key areas that have emerged as really contentious and are likely to generate a lot of discussion and debate moving forward. And have really been a focal point or priority for Michigan's Children and many of us, even leading up to this point. And so we've got a couple of experts on with the panel today to talk specifically about those issues, more generally around school aid funding in general, and this movement towards a more equitable funding system for our K-12 education and our public education here in Michigan. And then more specifically on the implementation of the universal pre-K proposal and its impact on childcare providers and childcare funding in general in the state budget are really the areas we're going to primarily focus on, but we'll answer questions that folks have on different areas. And as Terry indicated, there's a lot of resources that we'll be putting out at Michigan's Children that a lot of our partners are putting out as well as this process plays out, and that we'll continue to provide to folks as advocacy tools and as help so people can continue to engage with their legislators as this process moves forward. And one thing I'll say now, and then I'll reiterate again at the end, is really now is the time for advocates to really engage and to continue to engage with their lawmakers. We've seen activity and movement on a lot of these budgets already, these subcommittee reports, but really it's been by a relatively few of the overall legislature, right? I mean, subcommittees in the Senate sometimes consist of only 4 members. And so to this point, that's really all that's voted on any budget bill at all. And some of these areas in the Senate, I mean, the House committees are a little larger than that, but it's still a very small fraction of the overall legislature has voted on a lot of these budget bills. And so now is the time where all legislators are going to be asked to vote on these budget bills as they move through full appropriations and then action on the House and Senate floor. And then ultimately these budgets will have to be passed by the full House and the full Senate as well. So now is really a great time to start to engage, if you haven't already, or to continue to engage with your lawmakers, whether or not they're on the subcommittee or the full appropriations committee or not. They're going to be engaging in this budget process more and more as we move towards the finish line here. So this is a great opportunity. So you can jump to the next slide, Stephen, and I think Maddie's going to give some highlights on some of the areas we're focused on, and then around early childhood specifically, and then we'll jump into the panel conversation with Tyler and Jeff.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. So yes, I'll jump into some updates on where things landed for childcare and a little bit about UPK. So the House Appropriations Subcommittee recommended a MyLeap budget. It passed back last week, I believe, and included in this was a increase in childcare scholarship rates. So for some context, The child care scholarship is paid to child care providers who accept children who receive a child care scholarship from the state for free or reduced child care. So with childcare rates, the governor proposed a 10% increase in rates, which, as a reminder, would not get us back to the 20% cut that rates experienced last year. Last year there was a 26% cut in rates to childcare businesses. And on the other hand, the House proposed a 20% increase in childcare rates. So that would almost get us back up to where providers were last year. The Senate has not determined childcare rates at this point. Also, I wanted to mention that the Infant and Early Childhood Mental Health Consultation Program, which serves childcare and GSRP programs across the state, the governor proposed flat funding at $3 million to continue to serve providers in 31 counties across the state. The Senate hasn't weighed in yet. And the House also proposed flat funding, and advocates are pushing for a $1 million increase in funding for mental health consultation. I'll give some advocacy resources at the end to help you reach out. Also wanted to share, there was not any proposal for presumptive eligibility for the child care scholarship, which is one of our main priorities for childcare. This would mean that families would be able to receive the child care scholarship very shortly after they apply, instead of having to wait weeks or months before getting access to the child care scholarship. So we are pushing hard for that, and we'll have some resources for you to push hard for it as well with your lawmakers. There was also nothing sufficient around increasing childcare wages, except for the fact that they were looking to increase childcare subsidy rates, and that is a way that providers can increase wages. And one last thing is that the governor proposed a $60 million investment in child care educators. And that would be to give all child care educators access to the child care scholarship for their own families, for their own children. And neither the House nor the Senate proposed that investment. So there's a lot of work and a lot of advocacy we need to do to actually create a budget that will support the childcare system. Back to you, Matt.
Okay, what about early on? Maddie, you want to just highlight quick on early on?
Oh, yes, thank you. So also, the governor proposed a $1 million increase in funding for Early On, which is Michigan's early intervention program for infants and toddlers with disabilities. So once again, the governor proposed, it was basically an inflationary increase. It would be a $1 million increase in funding. Then the House proposed a $17 million increase in funding for Early On, which is huge. It would almost double state funding for Early On. And it's really what we need in order to properly serve kids, especially after the pandemic. There's been a 26% increase in referrals for children to seek services from Early On. And then on the Senate side, they proposed even less than the governor did. They proposed only a $703,000 increase in funding for Early On. So that, would not be whatsoever sufficient. So we are pushing hard for the House's proposal of a $17 million increase for Early On.
Thanks. And then universal pre-K obviously is another big issue, and we're going to jump into that with Tyler and someone with Jeff as well. So why don't you jump on to the next slide, Stephen, and we'll get started with there we go. With our Q&A here. So really, I guess, Tyler, why don't we jump right into it on the universal pre-K, and then we'll go to Jeff, and then we'll come back probably to some of this as well. So, the Governor Whitmer started this push towards universal pre-K all the way back to last year, which he called for the implementation of a universal preschool opportunity for all 4-year-olds in Michigan. And immediately, I think the early childhood advocates and the child care advocates as well, expressed some concerns about about the importance on this being implemented in a way that supports the childcare industry as a whole. I think the governor heard those concerns, her team heard those concerns, and have tried to follow a path of implementation towards this that protects or supports childcare providers as much as possible. A lot of work was done with this. Jeff Campazano's group, there was a roadmap or an implementation plan that was developed over an extended period of time that really laid out a process for implementing and moving Michigan towards a universal pre-K opportunity that supports and provides opportunities for traditional childcare providers and community-based organizations and providers to be a part of this as well. But there was always this concern, and continues to be this concern about fidelity to that, and maintaining this focus on making sure that everybody is able to take advantage of increased public investments in pre-K, and we're not creating a system where we're pulling 4-year-olds out of the childcare system and putting them into other public options. And that we're seeing this now play out in some of this proposals that are coming out of the House and the Senate. We'll start with the Senate. The Senate proposal this year had what I kind of call a backhanded shot or bullet towards the childcare industry, where they provided language in there that sounds great and is something that ideally would be awesome. This provision that in order to be eligible for GSRP slots, you have to be able to fund or pay your employees, your teachers, as much as the schools are. And that's just simply not a reality for many childcare providers. And so this was kind of a backhanded effort to do what the House version really did more upfront and straightforward way of really targeting these dollars specifically towards schools. So Tyler, why don't we start with kind of talking about that, the Senate piece and the pay equity piece and the concerns from the childcare world about that, and then we'll get into the House version itself.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. So I think it's no secret from a pay perspective that childcare centers are much differently funded than public schools. So having holding them to a parallel pay structure is a very challenging financial feat for any childcare provider to be able to do. And I believe in that recommendation, they also required childcare providers to pay. So public education is paid in different levels based on tenure. And I believe that recommendation states that childcare providers have to match those level payments. There was some conversation early about just paying the minimum in that district, but I believe they're requiring the levels, which, oftentimes these to-be universal pre-K or GSRP teachers, whatever you want to call them, often many of the people who are going to be teaching these classrooms don't have the same accreditation as public school teachers, and they're most likely using the variance of 6 years to get their education. And I think just from a financial perspective and a model of childcare, we're not able to pay those rates. But I think, if you look at a tenure and how you value that, is a really challenging thing for childcare providers to do.
Yeah, no, and I think you're absolutely right. And I mean, it's tricky from an advocacy standpoint, because certainly we want everyone to be paid more, right? We've argued forever that we want childcare providers to be paid more. We want pre-K teachers to be paid more. We want everybody to be paid more. So it sounds, logical and makes sense, but absent the specific resources from the state or from the public, from the government to support that, it's not a level playing field. And what the ultimate result will be is that childcare providers are not able to offer this program, which is in essence what the public ed lobby and what the K-12, interest lobby is really pushing for. We see it, like I said, more directly in the House version. We actually saw it more directly in the Senate version that originally came out last year. If you remember, out of the subcommittee that came out last year, at this time in the process last year, there was a much more direct attempt, similar to what the House did this year, at directing those school aid dollars. And this is a bigger, and I'm going to make this point now, and I'll probably make it again because I'm stuck on it. But I mean, this is the fundamental issue that we're going to continue to have and really that the governor created, right? If we're going to put significant school aid fund dollars into an expansion of a pre-K program towards universal pre-K for all 4-year-olds in Michigan, the public education lobby in Michigan is going to continue to focus their efforts and to say that those school aid dollars need to go to school entities, whether it's ISDs or traditional K-12s. They want all school aid dollars going to school-based entities and not being directed away towards community-based childcare providers or anybody else. The same thing at after school, right? We try to get fun, and the same argument is there. And this is going to continue to be this argument. Even if we win this battle this year, it doesn't mean it's next year. And so to some extent, I mean, this was the logical scenario that was going to and is going to play as we continue to have this fight. And, this is one of the reasons why at Michigan's Children, we've really tried to get the focus shifted towards more universally support for the child care system, which
Matt, you're
preschool is a component of, part of, but not 4-year-olds. Okay, so thanks for that, Tyler. Before we get, let's jump into the House version then right now as well on pre-K. So the House version went even further into, this kind of notion that the school aid funds should be in the UPK, universal pre-K approach, should be really focused on school-based programs. And so we've had for years, really since the last time we expanded GSRP in Michigan under Governor Snyder, that we have had a provision in the budget consistently, I think it's almost 10 years now, where the ISDs are required to contract with community-based providers for 30% of their GSRP available slots in their service area. Now, there's a waiver process that they can waive out of that if they can show that they attempted to do that and there aren't enough community-based providers in their service area interested in offering GSRP services, so then they can waive out of that. But that 30% provision has been critical in requiring the ISDs to work with community-based childcare providers to offer GSRP services or pre-K services in their communities. The House version eliminates that requirement and takes that 30% out. Let's talk about that a little bit, Tyler, and what that might mean to folks in the childcare world who want to be a part of expansion of pre-K.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. So I think, just taking a step back, if we look at UPK rollout, this is the first year that, we're moving forward with this model. So now really is the time for childcare providers to have their voices be heard and to push back, because we're going to be setting a precedent for the battles in the future, as you previously mentioned. And, unfortunately, most ISDs that I talk to right now are not even meeting that 30% threshold. So it's more of a guideline than a requirement at this point. So I think either way, we need to advocate for that to be in writing so that when community-based providers are having conversations with ISDs and requesting to be a part of those programs, they have some backing saying, well, there's a requirement for you to work more with community-based organizations, or else you're right, they are going to want to have access to those dollars, open their own programs. And we know, like previously mentioned, we are not, as community-based organizations, on the same playing field as schools. We do not get the same support for the food program. We do not get tax-free buildings. We do not get different benefits that they get. So it's important that we make sure that our seats are at the table when in childcare in Michigan. It's no secret that 4-year-olds have the most favorable ratio, and that's where childcare providers make money. And if we lose 4-year-olds, the infant and toddler care and everything before that will plummet, because community-based providers cannot support and charge a reasonable tuition to parents without having the income and the profitability that 4-year-old programs provide.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And so for what people who may not be as familiar with all of this, what this is often referred to as a mixed delivery model. All right. And so what that means is that when you expand preschool opportunities in your state, what we've learned from the experience that other states have done this, and somewhat even in Michigan ourselves when we've expanded this, is we have to commit to a mixed delivery model, meaning that different delivery system opportunities for that expansion of pre-K, meaning including childcare providers, traditional childcare providers, community-based providers, as well as schools. What happened several years ago, even more than 10 years ago, when universal pre-K was kind of a hot topic or a hot idea, we saw several states that really jumped full force into offering universal pre-K. And without being committed to a mixed delivery model, we saw really huge challenges in those states result to their childcare systems. Just like Tyler indicated, the system, as messed up as it is built on the notion that you can make a little bit of money maybe, or at least cover your costs with 4-year-olds. And if you take them out of the system implodes because it just doesn't work financially for anybody as a business to provide that. And so subsequently, we've seen other states learn from this, and as they've moved to expand their pre-K, Massachusetts being a good example, and others, they've really committed to this mixed delivery model of pre-K expansion, meaning that there's opportunities for childcare providers as well as school-based programs to administer and provide preschool opportunities for families. And the governor, in her proposal has committed to this, and is in this implementation plan that's been developed around this is focused on trying to adhere to a mixed delivery system moving forward with this expansion of pre-K. But these versions that are coming out of the legislature, particularly the House one, but even the Senate one with that pay equity provision, and then the House one more directly, are really shots directly at this idea of mixed delivery and more towards focusing the pre-K effort entirely in schools. There's even another piece in that same House version where the governor had proposed a specific pot of money, and this was included in this current year's budget as well, directly towards programs to expand classrooms or to utilize capital funds, essentially to set up and organize and expand their classroom opportunities for pre-K. And this is being used currently by both community-based providers as well as some schools. There's language added in the House proposal that just came out of the subcommittee that prohibits that from being used for community-based programs, and that only school-based providers would be eligible for these startup funds and for these funds that would be allowed to expand or create more opportunities for pre-K in your communities. I mean, that's a direct shot at community-based providers as well. And so this has created, obviously, as you can tell, a lot of concern amongst early childhood advocates, certainly amongst the childcare providers and advocates for childcare as well. There was a joint statement put out last week by Michigan's Children, the Michigan Association for the Education of Young Children, ECIC, and others raising concerns about this. I know there's a lot of discussion about this, and this will be a hot topic as we move forward here, through the rest of this budget process. And it's something that we're certainly going to continue to focus on in Michigan's Children, and I know a lot of others will as well. All right, let's jump over to the kind of the school side, and I'm sure we'll come back to some more of this childcare stuff. So Jeff at Ed Trust Midwest, you guys lead the MPEO, the Michigan Policy Equity Opportunity Group coalition that Michigan's Children is proud and excited to be a part of. We've done, we identified a number of areas of focus in where we think the legislature and the governor should be prioritizing as we try to move towards a more equitable funding system for public education in Michigan. Talk a little bit about what we're seeing from the House and Senate versions to this point as it relates to the priorities of MPEO.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. I'm really thankful to be here as part of the panel discussion. And I'm learning a lot about early childhood from this, so it's always good to learn. And we are fully supportive of expanding, and putting money into early childhood education, because we know it sets up students to do better when they enter into the K-12 system. But as Matt said, we're part of the Michigan Partnership for Equity and Opportunity. We're focused on how do we improve achievement for all students, and particularly how do we close achievement gaps for students who have historically been underserved. And so we look at a couple of sets of students, including students from low-income backgrounds, students with disabilities, English learners, and then also students who are living in rural communities. And we know that all these groups of students face hurdles and have been underfunded for a long time. And so last year, I just want to step back and to put this year's budget in context. Last year's school aid budget was the best school aid budget they've had really in history. And what drove that was a lot of increased state revenue, but also a lot of federal dollars that the state had to spend. And so we saw really large increases in investment, which is great. I think this year we're going to take a step back to like the normal, with a little bit less revenue coming in. And so how do we continue to advance and fund these students with less resources than we had last year? So last year we were able to get a pretty significant investment into what they call the at-risk line item. This goes to help students from low-income backgrounds. We also were able to create a new formula so that students living in or going to school with high concentrations of poverty were actually able to get more dollars. And so that was a great step forward. But that line item is only funded at about a third of what it really needs to be funded to really provide students with the resources they need to succeed. So we have been encouraging the legislature to invest an additional $500 million for those students through the at-risk line item. The Senate has an increase of about 122 million, which is, a decent size increase, but certainly far short of the 500 million we were asking for. The House has about a $70 million increase. So, we have some work to do. I think a lot of what it comes down to is reprioritizing how the state allocates their school aid dollars. A lot of times that goes to particular categoricals or to investing in a foundation allowance or whatever. But we think that there's certainly enough resources currently available that we could make a significant investment into students from low-income backgrounds. The another area that we're really focused on is increasing funding for English learners. And as this is a group of students that has historically been underfunded. Michigan ranks among the worst states in the country in terms of the amount of extra funding we provide these students. And last year we were able to get a 50% increase in funding, but it's still way below where we need to be. And so this year we're advocating doubling funding for these students from 40 million roughly to about 80 million. And thankfully the Senate agreed with us, included that increase in funding. The House only included about a $5 million increase. And so again, we have some work to do with our House, with the House members over there. I think generally they when we meet with them, they certainly seem supportive, but it's just a matter of putting their money where their mouth is. And so and then another group of students that we've been advocating for is students with disabilities. And while there's not a lot of changes in sort of how they are funding students this year, one thing that we have been advocating for, along with some of our partners, is to do a study on how the state, the sort of the funding mechanisms for students with disabilities. Is it equitable? Is it really meeting the needs of students? How much more money would we need if we were going to fully meet the needs of students? And so there was actually money put into both the House and Senate budget this year to do that study. We think that's a good first step, because what we want to make sure is if we start to invest in those students, we want to make sure that we're investing correctly and that we're not just throwing money at something without knowing that we're going to get a good return and that it's actually going to meet the needs of those students. And then, I mentioned rural students. Last year, for the first time ever, the state included specific money to fund school transportation. And this disproportionately helps rural school districts because they have a larger geographic area. They spend a lot more of their dollars on transportation. As we have been advocating to continue that funding, both the House and Senate do continue $125 million for that. We think that's great. And so we're happy that, because what that will do is that will free up dollars in rural districts that they can now put into the classroom, to either, reduce class sizes, hire paraprofessionals, whatever. So I say all this, we last year we made great strides in terms of equitable funding and starting to shift the focus to meeting the needs of individual students rather than just sort of a one size fits all approach. This year, because of limited resources, it's going to be a little bit more of a challenge. But we have been meeting with legislators. We will continue to engage with them. And so we're optimistic that we will be able to get more funding than certainly what was in the House budget. And so that's where we're at this point. So Matt, I'd be happy to answer any questions on that.
Thanks, Jeff. No, I think that was a great summary. Obviously more work to do, but it's on, I think we're moving in the right direction. I think that the coalition that you guys have organized that we're a part of has done a great deal to bring these conversations to the forefront and these issues to legislators' attention. And it's going to be, I think it's going to be a long-term battle, right? That changing the kind of paradigm or even the way we think about education funding in the state is going to be something that we have to commit to and continue to push for. And I think we're making progress. Certainly not as much as we'd like to see as often or as soon as we'd like to see it, but we are making progress. And even the pushing for equity is going to continually be at the forefront and at the heart of what we do at Michigan's Children. And I know a lot of people that are on the call as well today. So why don't you share, Jeff?
I just want to say that, you're right. It is a long-term, it's a long-term effort. And I think what people fail to realize is just for how long we have disinvested in public education, how long we have underfunded particular groups of students. And so when I was testifying in front of the Senate Education Budget Committee, one of the senators was like, "Hey, we took care of this last year, didn't we?" And it's like, well, you did a great start, but it's like the very first start. Now we've got to add the next, several legs of the journey to catch up to where we are, because we've dug such a deep hole for ourselves. And we're not really going to see any real meaningful change unless we're committed to continuing to make, large investments in those students. So. Yeah,
no, you're absolutely right. And why don't you maybe share in the chat or where people can find more information and resources about this issue? One of the things I particularly have really enjoyed, especially this year, it seems like more with the effort with the coalition is, and this is similar to what we just talked about with childcare, is we can learn from other states, right? We're not the only state looking at trying, different ways to more equitably fund education in our state. And there are a lot of great examples. And we've talked to a lot of folks on the ground in other states, even just in recent months, about their experience, about what worked and what didn't work. And so there is a lot of information out there. And, once again, it's imperative for us and others who care about these issues to continue to advocate on behalf of this and making our voices heard. But there are, there's examples on how we can make this work better.
Yeah, sure. And one other thing I just want to mention too is that, a lot of the dollars that get spent for students from low income backgrounds, there's a specific, they have to go to those specific students, provide a specific, level of service or, types of services. And I think you'll see an effort this year to allow districts more flexibility in how they spend those dollars, which, and I know a lot of the urban districts would like to spend those dollars to pay for teacher salaries so that they can remain competitive with their suburban counterparts, and so they can keep high quality teachers in the classroom. We just want to make sure that the dollars are actually reaching the students where they're intended for. And so we're advocating for additional transparency and accountability and like a more easily accessible public reporting tool, because, the last thing you want to do is increase funding for students and not know where the dollars are going. And we've seen, like you said, we looked at California, for instance. They did this a couple of years ago, and they couldn't account for about 45 cents on the dollar where it was going. And so we don't want to, let's learn from their mistakes. We don't want to duplicate those mistakes.
Yeah, and that's not a new issue. I mean, I remember back 1,000 years ago when I chaired the school aid budget in the House, and the at-risk funding then was basically unaccounted for. And there were all kinds of examples of band uniforms and swimming pools and other things being purchased or where these at-risk dollars were not meant for those purposes. And so, yeah, no, and that it's a challenge, but it's a worthwhile issue and something certainly we're committed to fighting for. All right, let's jump back. I'm looking in the chat here. I noticed a bunch of questions or comments about home-based providers as well. And I want to be clear that when I talk about childcare providers or community-based organizations, I'm including all of this. And one of the issues, frankly, we had even with the governor's budget proposal was that I've referred a couple of times to this implementation plan or the roadmap, sometimes it's referred to. And this is so when the governor first announced her push towards universal pre-K, there was a lot of concern, as I said. And so one of the things that immediately became of that was, and this was the advocates pushing for this as well, was the governor and actually the Kellogg Foundation and some others committed to funding a group to put together an implementation plan or a roadmap on how we could move Michigan towards a universal pre-K system that supported all childcare providers as well. And so it took a long time, and they met with a lot of folks and interviewed, and there was public comments about accepted and all of this. And that plan ultimately came out, and included in that roadmap and in that plan is a provision that home-based childcare providers should be eligible for this expansion as well, and that the state needs to create a system and a program that allows home-based childcare providers to offer GSRP or pre-K opportunities within their service as well. The governor's budget proposal for this year did not include that provision. And so that was very concerning right off the bat to those of us who have been engaged in this, Michigan's Children and others as advocates, is that the governor helped commission and really pushed for this implementation plan and this roadmap. And then her own budget proposal did not follow it to the extent that it included a provision specifically for home-based providers. And then obviously we have not seen that included in either the House or the Senate version that has come out that have gone even further in excluding childcare providers or not being as inclusive or focused on childcare providers for the expansion of pre-K. And so these issues are all there. And the roadmap, like I said, I think by and large, most of the childcare advocates and early childhood advocates believe is the best way, or at least a very as good way as we could probably get to implementing a universal pre-K system that protects the interests of childcare providers and supports childcare providers across the childcare spectrum in taking advantage of in being a part of the pre-K expansion. And there's been also some communication in the chat around the amount. So Maddie, remind us, what is the per slot? So one of the good things about this, as we've seen this focus on pre-K over the last several years, is we have been successful in increasing the amount of money that the state funds for each individual slot for pre-K. So what is that amount in the proposals for this year? Oh, you're on mute.
Oh, I'm on mute. Yeah, so for the GSRP per slot allowance, the governor proposed increasing that amount to $10,000 and to $10,300, which is a 7.6% increase. And I'd have to go back and find what the House and Senate proposed.
I think they're along those lines. So it's gone up above it. It used to be tied to what the basic foundation allowance was for per pupil at K-12. And in the last couple of years, we've actually increased it to be above what the basic per pupil foundation allowance. But that's per year for 4-year-olds. So that's a good funding level. And if you look at us in comparison to other states even that offer pre-K, that's not the big issue we have. The amount of money that the state is funding per slot for 4-year-old per year is $10,000. That's not the fight. I mean, in other states, they have that as a big fight where the state may offer $4,000 per child for a pre-K program and think that that covers the cost. That's not where the issue is. The issue we're having here in Michigan is on how those funds are distributed or who's eligible to take part of this expansion. And I saw some other comments or questions around the ISDs and the ISDs involvement in this. It's an interesting piece of this. And so I will say this, having been involved with this for way too long, but when we did the last pre-K expansion, so this was under Governor Snyder with a Republican-controlled legislature. So this was back in, 8 years ago, maybe now 6, 8 years ago, I don't even remember. But up until that time, we had a state-funded pre-K program. We had the Great Start Readiness program, was still operating, but it was administrated right through the K-12s. And then we had a separate categorical, a separate funding pot that was for community-based providers that was much smaller. So at the time we were at about $100 to $110 million every year. We were putting into pre-K for 4-year-olds, going right through K-12s, not the ISDs at all. And then we had about $10 or $12 million in a separate pool that other childcare providers could apply for to offer pre-K programs as well. When when Governor Snyder wanted to expand pre-K by $140 million, so we more than doubled the size of the program, it was clear under that administration and with that legislature, we would have to shift the administration of this to the ISDs. The Republican legislature was not going to give that type of expansion directly over to K-12s to administer and operate. And so the ISDs didn't want it at the time. I was in countless meetings with ISD officials and administrators, and they were very apprehensive about getting involved in pre-K at all or being a part of this. It was kind of forced upon them. Now they'll never let it go. It's another issue, but it's central to what they do. But so we switched the administration of the GSRP program over to ISDs, and then ISDs, contract with the K-12s and community-based providers in their service areas to run this program. And we put in this requirement that 30% of those slots on the ISD level need to be directed towards community-based programs, not schools, and then the waiver process and everything else. And that's stuck since that expansion. So 8-10 years, whatever it is now, that part has stuck. And now this is an effort, at least in the House version, to undo that provision and allow the ISDs to just go directly to their K-12 providers in their communities for expansion of these services. So that's a little bit of a history lesson. I don't know how informative that is. I think the question was, why do we need the ISDs to administer this now with the development of MyLeap, a new department, a new state department that oversees early childhood? I think that's a valid question. I don't see any real effort or momentum towards shifting this away. And at this point, the ISDs are very much wedded to this notion of administering the GSRP programs in their communities. And you'd have a big political fight in that regard about shifting this away from them.
Yeah,
Tyler has a comment, Matt.
Go ahead, Tyler.
Thanks. Just to wrap up that GSRP conversation, it's very unfortunate that at-home providers are not included in it. And I think that's something we absolutely have to advocate for. In the interest of the governor's timeline, they went with the existing GSRP distribution system so that they could get this rolled out quickly and immediately show success with the program. So there was a lot of things that got glossed over during that. So please understand that we are fighting for provider or at-home providers. And I personally, my mom, Hunty's Clubhouse, started as an in-home childcare center. So I've seen that struggle and that pain. So it's a very high priority for us to ensure they have access to the same resources. But if we want to look at something that can be impacted immediately across the board of all child care providers, we have an opportunity to really advocate for scholarship rates right now. Like we have the governor saying 10%, we have the Senate saying 10%, and the House saying 20%. If there's opportunity for us to move up from that 10%, and every child care provider that offers scholarship can have access to those increased fundings. So in terms of a focus, I think that's an opportunity for us to get a win and narrow in on something that we can really impact, when we will keep hammering the at-home childcare provider message, but it's a very uphill battle at this point, unfortunately. That's all I had, Matt.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that sentiment. No, absolutely. I mean, the fight on rates has got to continue. I mean, this is the fundamental issue that at Michigan's Children we've tried to stress, and I think that we also need to collectively continue to make this point that we need more prioritization and focus on the child care system as a whole, and not just the 4-year-olds. I mean, here, the fundamental problem we have still at the end of the day is that all of this focus is on 4-year-olds, and who gets to run a pre-K program for 4-year-olds with all this public dollars and increased public dollars and all of this increased public dollars towards 4-year-olds could easily be going towards the entirety of the childcare system instead. And we'd be in a much better position. And that's frankly exactly what we're seeing in other states, is a focus on birth through kindergarten entry or school entry, public interest and public prioritization, state prioritization and state funding support for the child care system as a whole, which pre-K is a part of, but not just this focus solely on pre-K.
I'll just jump in real quick and mention what I was just going to type in the chat. So if you're a provider and you're frustrated and you want to find a way to give yourself and your team members and your families a voice, join the Michigan Child Care Provider Collective. Our mission is to provide you with resources so that you can distribute that and have successful advocacy efforts. So I've done a lot of talking to people who lead childcare provider associations in other states, and every single it's like, how do you make this effective? And they say every single one says the squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? We have to be out there. We have to be talking to our legislators. We have to let them know that these points matter and that there's a lot hinging on these decisions. So we're going to be providing through our Facebook group right now, primarily resources for you to send to your parents and say, hey, we're sick of our childcare rates going up because of the lack of investment from the state. So we want to get everybody involved in this advocacy effort so that as a whole system, we're seeing improvements, just not on specific line items. So I'll resend that link in there. Please join that group so that we can get those resources to you efficiently and provide some information around that.
Thanks, Tyler. I think Maddie just put the link to the Facebook group as well in the chat. And Maddie, why don't you quick tell people about some of the other resources that have been developed or are being developed, the call scripts and other things that people can utilize here in advocacy efforts.
Yeah, definitely. So we have put together call scripts and an email template to help you call or email your state lawmakers about the child care scholarship. So we put together one to advocate for a 26% increase in child care scholarship rates. And in a few days, we'll be putting out a resource around, supporting the House's 20% increase in rates. Or, increasing it beyond that, if that's possible. And so look out, we will be sending in an email call scripts and email templates and other advocacy resources to advocate for childcare rates to be increased, along with including family childcare providers in the GSRP expansion and several other really critical issues. So definitely stay tuned and look out for our emails. Also, yeah, definitely, as Tyler shared, join the Michigan Child Care Provider Collective. Yeah, thank you all for joining.
Yeah, no, thanks, Maddie. Yeah, so there's lots of resources. Well,
could we move on to the next slide, please? Just so this is going to be posted along with the call scripts that Maddie mentioned on our webpage at www.michiganschildren.org under the Lunch and Learn tab and resources. And we've got links for you to look up your senator's name, their phone number, their email list, as well as your representatives' contacts. We've also got contacts and phone numbers to Senate leaders and House leaders. So please use these resources as you do your outreach on this issue or on education equity, as Jeff Cobb had brought up. So on the next slide, yes, these also have links to them. There's a legislative handout guide from the Michigan Partnership for Equity and Opportunity that Michigan's Children is part of. It's called MPAO for short. that many other groups are involved in. There's also an analysis on a House fiscal analysis on the House School Aid and Education Appropriations Subcommittee recommendations that you've been hearing about today. There's also an impale statement on that issue on funding for pre-K and pre-K to 12, grade 12. And then we've also got a budget basics on that explains the governor's priorities that were introduced back in February. Lastly, I just want to bring up that we will be updating an analysis of the budgets when they go through the House and Senate on the floor. And we'll send out notices of that in our bulletin, and you'll find those documents up on our website. So look for incoming days for those analyses as they become available, as the actions become available.
Thanks, Terry. Stephen, if you can go back 2 slides real quick, I'll close us out here. I know we're coming up on 1 o'clock. So as I stated at the beginning, now's the time. I mean, really, we're in the midst of, I'd say the beginning of the middle of this budget process where we've seen these subcommittee reports come out. Full appropriations committees are acting now and will be acting for the next weeks. But a lot of the legislators haven't even addressed these yet and haven't even engaged at all in this budget process. So now is the time to contact your legislators about these issues or any other issues in the state budget that you're concerned about or, that impact kids and families that you care about. If you want more information about those, please reach out to us. At Michigan's Children, we'd be happy to provide what information we have. As Maddie said, we've got a lot of resources available, more coming out. We'll continue to analyze these actions as they take effect or as they move through the process. But we really need people who care about these issues to engage with their lawmakers and let them know what their priorities are. A lot of big important decisions are going to be made in the next month and a half here that impact kids and families and are going to go a long ways towards hopefully Michigan having a budget that reflects the priorities of the people who care about kids and families and puts us on a path to be a better state to be a kid and a better state to raise a family. So thanks for tuning in. It's 1
Last slide,
o'clock.
please.
Go ahead, Terry. You can close us out.
Just last slide, please. Our next Lunch and Learn program is at the end of the month, and again, watch for upcoming budget basics analyses. And if you haven't signed up for our e-bulletin, please do so on our Take Action page. Thank you. Just wanted to slide that in, Matt, before we
Yeah.
we
Thanks,
left
everybody.
everyone. Thank
Stay
you for
tuned.
being here. Bye-bye.
Well, thank you again.